Hello again. Raise your hand if you like hitting children. Most people don't like hitting kids, but many of them do. The MinPost reports that the University of Minnesota determined that 35% of American parents use spanking as of 2017. This is a concern to many psychologists due to the growing body of evidence that suggests that spanking is not only less effective, but risks negative side effects. Before I discuss this research, I'd like to address that many people realize that they were spanked and they seem to have turned out okay. It's important to dispel this black and white idea that spanking is either detrimental or harmless, because in reality it's simply considered one of many risk factors that contributes adversely to child development. So how effective is spanking and what are the negative outcomes that may occur? Dr. Elizabeth Jershoff, a specialist in child development and family relations, wrote an interesting article on the U.S. National Institutes of Health's National Library of Medicine, where she explains that spanking does not produce exclusive benefits relative to other punitive strategies, and that it's actually less likely to modify behavior. Corporal punishment is shown to have similar results in terms of short-term compliance, but less long-term compliance, so higher likelihood of the targeted behavior to reoccur. Spanking also risks negative outcomes, as I've mentioned, and it's associated with aggression, delinquency, and a higher susceptibility to mental disorders. Some experts even go so far as to argue that it provides an aggressive model or negative model regarding how to deal with conflict and potentially emotions if you're emotional throughout the process. Psychology organizations, particularly parenting organizations, are coming to a consensus that spanking is simply suboptimal. One of the most influential examples is the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. The good news is parents are not completely useless without spanking. There are many healthy alternatives to modify child behavior. I've gathered information of these alternatives from the David G. Myers textbook, Psychology. He is an author of many scientific periodicals, and he earned his PhD at the University of Iowa. The first strategy is called modeling. Modeling is exhibiting certain behavior in front of a child for them to imitate. They have a high proclivity for imitation due to mirror neurons in the frontal lobe. Modeling is proven to be effective at increasing prosocial behavior and facilitating learning. But as I mentioned earlier, modeling can also be used for bad. And as you'll see in an example here, an aggressive model is likely to increase aggressive behavior in a child. This is the famous Bobo doll experiment, where hitting the Bobo doll with a mallet caused the children to exhibit it, to imitate this aggressive behavior. Another healthy alternative is positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is encouraging a targeted behavior with incentives and rewards. According to positivepsychology.com, reinforcement tactics like praise are particularly useful for increasing intrinsic motivation. It's also evident that teachers who focus more on promoting responsible behavior are more effective than teachers who focus on fixing irresponsible behavior. It's a generalization that focusing on the positives is healthier and more effective than the negatives when it comes to children. Also, Steve Baumgartner and Marie Crothers wrote in their 2019 textbook, Positive Psychology, about avoidance goals versus approach goals. Approach goals is about pursuing positives, and avoidance is avoiding negatives. Parents who focus on what their child should achieve as opposed to what they should avoid tend to convey an approach goal orientation in their children. And this orientation or proclivity to pursue positives rather than avoid negatives is associated with higher levels of motivation, optimism, life satisfaction, and other good things. Also, I'd like to note that spanking is about avoiding bad behavior. It's not something that pushes them towards the positives. So as you can see, corporal punishment is not the central pillar of discipline that parents are desperately reliant on. There are many healthy alternatives, and it's simply not considered optimal in modern psychology. I'd also like to mention that punishment is not a bad thing. In fact, it's recommended that punishment is combined with reinforcement. It's simply that there are better alternatives to physically harming your children. So what do you think about spanking after hearing this? And have I motivated you to alter your own parenting style that you plan on having with Chloe? Thank you for listening, and are there any questions?
No questions.
Thank you very much.